Good evening runners, and welcome back to another video from me, That Running Girl. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about whether I personally think it's braver to DNS, which means did not start, or DNF, which means did not finish. Now, I'm making this video in light of the fact that I just ran my 30th marathon, which was not the Sunday gone, but the Sunday before that. So about nearly 2 weeks ago, 1.5 weeks ago now, and I'm going to do an entire video on that because there is so much to unpack there. But I realised that I haven't made a video for a while, and I really wanted to jump on here and share my thoughts and my relevance on this. Because before I started my 30th marathon, the entire week before, I was absolutely dreading it. And I just was thinking, what am I doing? I don't know if I belong in this space anymore. In terms of marathon running, I don't know if I want to run marathons anymore, which was quite a scary thought to me as someone who has run marathons for the past 15 years. There hasn't been a year go by where I haven't run a marathon. In COVID, obviously when marathons and races weren't on, it was only a few months before Worcester 23 mile was back on, which was near enough a marathon. So yeah, for 15 years there has not been any time at all that I have not run marathons. So for me to even be questioning that, even as an internal dialogue, just questioning that, the thought process in my head, it's quite a big deal to me. So I thought before I unpack all of this in a big video and I talk about, how I was feeling before the race, what I did to prepare for the race, what I did during the race, how the race went, what I did after the race, recovery after the race, my future racing, mentality, and what I'm going to do after that, I thought I would just make a short video on whether I think it's braver to did not start or did not finish, which is obviously the classification in the results. When you look at the results, and if someone, paid for the entry fee and they had every intention of going to the race, but they didn't start the race, it will say, their name, and then it will say did not start. Or if you didn't finish the race that I did had a very, very strict 5-hour cutoff limit. So if you didn't finish the race, whether you pulled out or whether you just didn't make it to the finish line in time, it will say your name, and then it will say DNF, did not finish. And literally for my entire running life, DNF has always seemed like the absolute worst thing to me. I've always just been so fearful. Ironically, because I was so much faster in my 20s than I am in my 30s, which is another thing I'll get onto in the marathon video. But one thing that always really haunted me that just wasn't even, it shouldn't have even entered my head, because it was never even a question of whether I was going to be, not finishing because of pace, because I was quite quick in my 20s, but I always used to just be absolutely haunted by thinking, what if I'm in the results as did not finish? Did not finish was the absolute worst thing for me. Even if I, fell over in a race, I once fell over in a marathon and cut all my arms and my knees open, and I had blood pouring all down me from 8 miles in, and I had the worst race ever, but I just could not finish. To me, that just seemed like the absolute opposite of what a marathon stood for. To me, the marathon always kind of aligned and sort of was the ultimate test of physical and spiritual and mental endurance. And so for me, entering something like that is courageous in itself, and then running it and then finishing it, but non-finishing it, I would always feel like I could never forgive myself. If I ever didn't finish a marathon, I just couldn't forgive myself. I couldn't live it down, and I would just be my absolute own worst critic and just really hate on myself for having a DNF in a race result, even though realistically it's not like I'm a sponsored athlete or anything. I'm just an amateur athlete. I run for fun. I've run some decent times, but I'm slower now than I am in my 20s, and so it did get me thinking, the week before the marathon, should I just not do the marathon? I had paid for the marathon, I had trained for the marathon, I did, 2 really, really hilly 16-mile runs of like over 1,500 feet elevation, which even though they're not at sort of 18 or 20 mile mark, I feel like they're enough. They were enough to sustain me on a flat marathon course because the elevation profile was so much higher. Um, and yeah, just the week leading into it, I just felt really, really, really um, mentally just not geared up for it at all. I just didn't want to run. I could say all the reasons why, and go into sort of psychological like reasons why, but it just literally comes down to the fact of I just did not want to run. I didn't want to run this race. And a big reason why is because running with music has always been a huge safety blanket to me, and I always train with music, and if I can ever use music in a race I will always use it. On lower sort of distance races and less sort of intense races, in terms of distance, in terms of 10k, 10-mile, half marathon, I'm generally okay. It generally doesn't bother me too much if I can't use music, but for marathons especially, because they're such a long way, I always really like to use music. But the marathon that I was running, even though I've run it for over 10 years and I've never been able to use music, that's just is very strict in their rules that you're not allowed to use music. So I knew I wasn't allowed to use music. That wasn't an issue. But going into the race, I just didn't want to run it. And it really did cross my mind, should I just have a DNS, a did not start, on the race results, rather than going through the entire rigmarole, the entire, negative race experience of just having a really bad experience, and both having to endure that in an almost punishing way when you're not enjoying a marathon. One foot after the other for 26 miles is so long. So I was both sort of had the foresight of thinking it's just going to be really punishing, and then thinking I'm not going to run a good time, and in the future am I going to then look back on that race and have sort of anxiety about my next race because if it would have been so bad. And I honestly just thought I don't know whether I can even start. But then I did end up starting, and I did end up finishing the marathon. Like I say, I'm not going to talk about it now because it's a longer video. But I did end up finishing the marathon. It definitely was not my best time, and it was not the best experience, but I'm really glad that I persevered and, started the marathon, enjoyed the marathon, and finished the marathon, because I've definitely learned some running and life lessons from it, which I'm going to talk about in my review video when I finally get to make my 30th marathon review video, which I've titled The Beautiful Struggle. And I'm going to talk about all of the points that led me up to that 30th marathon, and all of the learnings and everything that I have, acquired mentally and physically through the sport, and where I'm heading with that in the future. But yeah, I personally do think sometimes, in hindsight now, I'm thinking it probably is braver to do not start rather than do not finish. And that's only because I feel like with the amount of people, runners that are YouTubers now, and runners that are on Instagram, and social is so saturated with runners now, which is actually a big reason why I don't post anymore, because sometimes I just actually think, is my content even that relevant still? Like when I started my YouTube channel 10 years ago, it was just to motivate other runners. Like I just had so much immense joy from running that all I wanted to do was pass on that joy to other people. And I just feel like the running scene socially, in the social media space, has just exploded in terms of, people growing and creating channels really, really fast and picking up followers really, really fast. And even the elites having like their own sort of sponsorship channels and getting sort of millions of followers and subscribers. And here's me with my like 800 subscribers that changes maybe, I get maybe 10 more followers like in a year or something. So it definitely made me thinking, maybe actually like I should take a back seat in documenting and kind of blogging my experience running. But then I also personally think, if I was watching me and I wasn't me, and I was a runner that, maybe wanted to run a marathon, and they were watching me who had run 30 marathons, and, I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the slowest, I was kind of mid-pack, but I used to be better than I am, and I'm kind of reflecting on my experiences, as a 37-year-old runner. You know, it's not like I'm coming on here running all these insane distances and I'm 22 and my legs are really fresh from life and everything. It's just not how it is anymore. So I think I'm definitely offering a more realistic perspective sometimes on this channel, which I hope can be relevant and relatable to some people if they're in that kind of space that I am in, which is a bit of a weird space when you've, you know, done lots of really you're really proud of the times you've run, and you've, you know, got a load of trophies, got a load of medals, and you're kind of thinking, what am I going to do now, and thinking about things. But yeah, I personally think in hindsight, if I had the choice, if I knew what my 30th marathon experience was going to be like before standing on that start line, I would have not started, put it that way. And that's me having admitting that as someone who has run for 19 years, which is really, really big and quite, you know, poignant for someone like me who used to be so extreme about, you know, running. I still love running, but I used to be so extreme about running. And these days I just think, do you know what? If you're just not feeling it, there are other races. You know, if you're not feeling it that much going into a race, it's probably because something's off. And it's probably because, you know, whatever it is, like if you've got an injury or just mentally, like you've got a lot going on, or you're just anxious, or, you know, for me, you couldn't use music and that's going to cause you like anxiety in the race, and really sort of hold back you psychologically and your performance in the race. So you can't really do what you're capable of physically because you're not there mentally. So yeah, I personally do think it's braver to did not start then did not finish, because like I'll detail in my 30th marathon video, I actually these days don't see any bravery or any kind of triumph in punishing yourself. I think there's a real difference, and I know this because I've run for nearly 20 years and I've run 30 marathons. I feel like there's a real difference between the victory and the triumph of pushing really hard and pushing your limits and going out of your comfort zone versus actually just being in such a struggle state and almost just punishing yourself mentally and physically that you're just not enjoying it anymore. And I really want to detail that difference because I think it's a really fine line of differentiation that not many people talk about in the running scene. And especially when you're having a bad race and you're looking around and you don't know whether other people are struggling. You know, people are struggling because it's a marathon. It's like, let's be honest, it's a marathon. It's not easy. But there are various levels of struggling, and I think it's really, really wise and good to pick up on your own intuition of how much physically and mentally that you feel you should be taking in events. Because if you're just not enjoying it, like, you're going to have a bad time on the day, and then, like I said, in the future, you're going to come back to that memory, and it might haunt you with anxiety for future races, and it might haunt you in training, thinking that you're not capable of what you're capable of. So as much as I 10 years ago wouldn't have said this, I do think it's braver to DNS rather than DNF. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and my next video is going to 100% be on my 30th marathon, everything that I did in the run-up to the marathon, how the marathon went, and my kind of mindset and recovery after the marathon. And yeah, after that I'll be doing some more gear reviews, and also I'm going to make a video on why I think podcasts are generally better than listening to music in training, and I'm going to list out some of my favorite podcasts that I've really been enjoying on my runs lately. So yeah, I hope you found that video helpful, and I'll see you in my next video.